I feel like something that's really, really meticulous and perfect and just all beautiful and doesn't acknowledge that there may have been feelings of impatience that came up in the process of doing it, or you know, that there's just more than this simple ability to articulate an idea. And so, you know, for that reason, there can be kind of messiness in my work at times, and I value that, and I try to really be in touch with when I'm if I'm making a big tangle, and that's something like with a glove, where I like that to show, and the awkwardness. I started, you know, drawing and painting and kind of all that stuff, and at some point I kind of felt frustrated with painting, and I didn't think I was stopping painting, but I just was doing one of those things that I still do, to take a break and playing with other things and thinking I was just doing like something for fun. And I'd actually found all this was back in New York, and I'd found all this fabric in a dumpster that was really nice fabric, though, like a factory going out of business, so like real stuff left over. And I took it home and started playing with collaging it, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. And then as I was playing with it, I just got more and more into it, and more interested in thread and the way the thread lines mimic drawing, and blocks of embroidery could mimic painting. Got really interested in the idea of the stain. That became my big focus, and kind of the way that stains will mark canvas. Some of my early ones are stains that were on like the end of a roll of canvas, like water stains, or then linens and things that were just actually stained, and then kind of responding to that and using that almost like a pattern and stitching, you know, filling the shape of the stain or going around the shape of the stain. And I had these ideas of, you know, on the one hand, sort of scrambling domestic techniques, like instead of cleaning the stain, mending it, but also, you know, these different ideas start to come from the process of doing it in the way that they would look like abstract paintings, like splashy drip paintings, and that, you know, in my mind is this very male movement, you know, this abstract expressionist movement where they would, you know, toss paint onto the canvas, and then there was this kind of humor to me in taking that and then overlaying it with this kind of traditional women's work of stitching, and then the thing where they really look like abstract paintings, so that's what people would think. And I can't tell you how many times I've shown them or had, you know, open studios where people kind of look, and, you know, I see on their face like, oh, more drip paintings, or, you know, I've seen hundreds of those, and then maybe they come closer, maybe they keep walking. But there's this kind of shock that can happen when they get close enough to see these just hours and hours of little stitches that are in there. And I like that in art. I like that surprise and that kind of humor, but then also, you know, a kind of horror that can happen where something that seems to have happened in a second turns out to be the product of incredible painstaking labor. Sometimes I've left bits of the stain exposed for various reasons, one of them being so that you can see it, so that you know what's going on without me necessarily having to say it, and others I think the obsessive covering over of every bit of the stain is more interesting, so it varies. I had this piece where there was this piece of kind of a rag that had some paint spatters on it, and it was really cool, and I wanted to stitch on it, but it had this like gunky bit of sort of glue in the middle. And I guess there's a lot of choices I could have made, but what I did was cut it out of the thing. And so I had this big hole in the middle. And I felt like, oh, it's the same kind of challenge. I thought just like embroidery can decorate or cover over a stain, lace work could kind of fill those holes. And it fills kind of a dual purpose, because it's both decorative, but it's also structural, because anybody who's ever worked on a stretched canvas knows if you cut a big hole in the middle, you're going to lose your tension and the thing's going to kind of collapse and get floppy. And so you need to really repair it to pull it back together. And so I started using, it's all also done with a needle, but it's similar to crochet or needle lace, where I've used the stitching both to bring the tension back and hold it together, and also to overlay those holes and be decorative. So when I started cutting holes in things and noticing that it kind of gave this opening to this space hidden behind the canvas, it made me think about this thing that a friend of mine referred to. Well, I was telling her the idea, and she said, oh, you mean the lie of painting? And I thought that was really funny, so I've been saying that since, that not that all painting is a lie, but that paintings are put on stretchers in order to make them portable and commodifiable. And so there's this couple of inches behind every painting that is just kind of, you know, goes unacknowledged, because it's just sort of how paintings are, and the paintings in general deal with the surface. But I like that it kind of hints at that space or looks into that space. And I guess what's really interesting to me about it is it turns them into objects, and they're not anymore, you know, they're embroidered, so anyway they're kind of in this funny line between painting and sculpture, because they move in and out of that surface. But then opening up the space behind and acknowledging it means that the whole thing, the stretcher bars and the space and the canvas, become a thing and not just an image. I always had this attraction to the backs of them, and the way that there's all these secret decisions that you know, nobody knows about, and that's where you kind of let yourself be careless, or let yourself be sloppy, or, you know, let your knot get too big, or a tangle happens, or you're too lazy to not, you know, tie off the thread and move to a new place. So you have these huge, you know, jump stitches, and there's a real intimacy to that, and a real I don't know, sense of truthfulness, maybe? Even though I say that it's a glove, it's not meant to be worn, and I just wear it to work on it, but it's, I think of it really as like the fact that it looks like a glove when it's done as being kind of incidental, and really what it is a cast of my hand. And obviously I knew that casting my hand in thread would result in a glove, but I think of it more as being a sort of play on negative space and this kind of building around something, sort of casting something in reverse. There's this other theme in a way, because to cast one hand through a process where you need the other hand to make it has a kind of masochism to it, and masochism is something I'm very interested in my work. I'm not going to really say if it's a theme the rest of my life, too personal, but I really am interested in it in art, and I think there's been a lot of interesting artists that have explored it, and I have this idea that the whole art making process is kind of masochistic in a way. But anyway, doing this, there's the obstacle part where I have to like hold the thread with my teeth to cut it, but there's also this way that, you know, I end up with these little like pokes all over my hand from the needle stabbing, and there's certain parts where I'm kind of trying to get it and digging in. And so that's sort of interesting to me. And some of the artists I admire who have used those kind of themes, you know, are like from the 60s and 70s, like, you know, Yoko Ono, that famous video where she has people cut her clothes off. And they're more performative, and this is kind of a process version of this, you know, yeah, kind of masochistic process. When it comes off, it has this look, you know, partly of a glove, but also like this shed skin that I think is really interesting. And I like also, you know, it has, you know, this lace glove look. It's almost like, you know, this Victorian artifact. When I started doing the holes, and you know, this subject of lace came up, and I thought, oh, I should learn how to make lace, kind of the same thing. And so I got, I asked around like some lace making guild, and I was still in New York at the time, and I got information for this woman, this Belgian woman who was like expert lace maker, and she invited me over to her apartment and said, sure, I'll show you how to make lace. And I spent one afternoon with her, and it was so grueling and like, I don't know, just hard and like really ordered. And, you know, she had me set up with all these bobbins. The technique is like, you know, kind of winding these things. And she would come in after leaving me for an hour slaving and say, oh, you made a mistake 5 rows back. We have to rip the whole thing out. And I was like, oh my God. And it also actually really solidified for me the fact that making the mistake 5 rows back was not a problem for me. Like, I was fine with the mistakes, and in fact the mistakes are what express, you know, that I was sitting there actually doing it by hand and maybe feeling frustration, or I'm an amateur, whatever. It was just like part of the reality of it. And I thought, you know, I really admire that people can make these beautiful, beautiful lace things and do it perfectly, and there's a place for that, but my place is not that place, and my place is making things that are a little kind of messed up and change as you go, and that I react to my own impulses to kind of mess it up or do it wrong, or my own inability to do it perfectly, and that's part of what's interesting to me. So this is a catalog from a show at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, which I have work in, and I'm really into it. It's a great show. It's actually up until the end of April. But, and it's all embroidery. They call it extreme embroidery. And so it has a few of my small embroidered kind of stains on canvas, and one that has cut holes. It also has this piece that I'm really into, which is this tablecloth. And there's a shot of it here in the book. And this happened really by accident, but it was this incredibly exciting thing where I was at this benefit, this art benefit in New York, and so the caterers came, you know, they had, you know, caterers come, and they brought these crazy yellow tablecloths, and they were, you know, all around the room, and in the middle of the event, and you know, it happens all the time, somebody knocked over a glass of red wine, and it spilled all over this yellow tablecloth, and somebody else rushed over and tried to wipe it, but whatever, it was spilled. And I immediately, like the next day, like when the guys were coming to pick up the stuff, I was like, oh, can I have the stained tablecloth? And to be honest, it wasn't really permanently stained. He was like, oh no, we have strong detergent, we can get that out. And I was like, well, can I have it anyway? And he was like, yeah, just take it. And so I took this stained tablecloth and I embroidered all around the stain, and kind of, you know, embroidered every little drip that had spilled down the side. And it's hard to see in this photo. I have other photos on my website, but you know, it gets a little, almost getting into kind of decorative stuff on the top where I use some pinks, but it's mostly red stitching. And I really liked it, and I felt like this massive collaboration to me, because I mean, I'm the one who kind of, you know, I get my name on it, and I'm the one who said like, okay, there's going to be a piece, but it was like all these different people who are involved in the fact of it happening like this, you know, presumably some party planner was like, yes, I'll take the yellow, you know, that's perfect. And then the caterer, who I guess the caterer came first, who said, okay, we have yellow, white, whatever. Party planner chose the yellow, they go to the event, you know, some lady, and I think she was some like big art world person, but unfortunately I can't remember who it was, but she knocks over the glass of red wine, and then all these employees of the place rushing over with damp napkins to try to blot it, and there's actually, in the surface of the piece, you can see these little kind of rubbed areas. And then this guy who just worked for the caterer who was like, yes, you can have it, and I won't tell. And then me, you know, and I get it, and I feel really good about it. It's in the museum. That was kind of my focus for years and years, was doing these stitched abstractions, which in my mind are not necessarily really abstractions, because they're actually kind of pictures of stains or responses to stains. And in the last just few years, I started doing some different types of pieces, and often I do them with this idea, like, I'm going to do something that's not so labor intensive, and they always turn out to be even more labor intensive. But for example, I started working on these paper sculptures that are mostly shredded, sometimes scissor cut paper, like groups of paper. So I did a couple out of old tax files, like all my forms and receipts, where I shredded it and then rolled up the shreds of paper and glued them all together to make these almost like doily looking flat things, but I again think of them as the way you would see like a slice of a tree, and you can look at it and you see like, oh, okay, it's however many years old based on how many rings, and you can even look really closely and see, oh, this year there was a drought. I mean, I can't see it, but you know, one of these like tree people can see like something about the climate from looking at the different years. You know, so I like that you can sort of look down at it like this slab, and it's because it's paper, it's like putting the tree back together. And there is this kind of theme of kind of, you know, horror at waste, and this idea of, you know, playing with how can you reuse this stuff. Obviously it's paper that has no purpose anymore after the 7 years are done. And then so putting it back into tree, but then also you can see my bank receipts and my unemployment slips from 1 year, and you know, whatever happened that year is in that slice. Humor is a really important thing. Like, my favorite artists are people who manage to do work that's conceptual but kind of funny too, and because I think there's too much that's either silly or like super dry conceptual, and I love the combination. And Tom Friedman is somebody who I think does that brilliantly, and seeing his work has always been really inspiring to me. And he has in common with like other artists that I really love, like Tim Hawkinson, that they bring incredible like virtuosic craftsmanship to very random kind of mundane things. And what I like about that is that if you know, like a bowl or something that's really normal and expected is beautifully crafted, that's beautiful. But if you craft the kind of things that he does, it's kind of like unbelievable that, you know, bringing that kind of effort and that kind of attention to something so mundane kind of takes you out of the normalcy of the world. And like, let's face it, normal is like going to jobs that we hate and like making money so we can ruin our own lives and like the planet, you know. So who wants to be normal, right? So this is a great Tom Friedman piece. They're all pretty much untitled, but this is untitled, Hair and Soap, a partially used bar of soap inlaid with a spiral of the artist's pubic hair. And if you get really close on that, you can see that that was not easy to do. That's like really, really carefully, mathematically, perfectly done. And of course there's like the poetic quality where it references, you know, when we've all seen the little bit of hair stuck in the soap, and you know, but you don't think about it. And he thought about that and thought about how if that wasn't just random or accidental, if it was like very, very carefully crafted, it would turn into this whole other thing. And anyway, I'm not going to try to analyze it. I'll leave that fun up to you all. But I mean, I think that's amazing. This one I like a lot. It's not so much crafted in the same way. It's called Hot Balls. And it is about 200 balls stolen from shops by the artist over a 6-month period are arranged on the floor. And what I like about it is that this piece, I think, influenced me because the fact of where this stuff comes from is what's key about it. So it's not so perfectly crafted. I mean, it's laid out very nicely. But I read this review of this piece once, which I thought was really, really funny, where the person said, you know, it raises all these different questions about process and materials, but it raises one really incredible question, which is how did he steal that giant red ball? So this piece, it kind of relates to a lot of these same themes of, like, destroy, repair, rescue. Basically what happened is I had this pattern fabric which had these cool looking flowers, totally different thing, and I had stuffed one and I thought, oh, I want hundreds and hundreds of little stuffed flowers like this, and I wasn't sure why, but I was in Vermont, and so I went to the thrift store and I was looking for, you know, clothes with flowers on them, and I saw this dress and I was struck, I was like dumbfounded. It was the most hideous dress I'd ever seen. And the thing that was really funny to me about it is these flowers, like, it's so desperate because the flowers are printed kind of to look really realistic. And I don't know, I just like had this whole thing with it. I was like, oh, those flowers are perfect. I'm gonna like take them out of this awful, awful dress. And I started cutting them out just so I could stuff them like this. But then I like was kind of fascinated by the dress, and so I didn't totally want to destroy it, and I thought, well, I'll cut the flowers out really carefully and not cut away anything else, so that if I want to do something else with it or use the other little buds that are left behind or anything else, it'll still be there. And so I'm cutting these circles and then cutting from one circle to the next, super careful. And this funny thing started happening where I'm cutting out all this stuff and the dress is growing. Because, you know, when you cut it, it starts to kind of like pull apart, and it was growing these like weird vine tendrils, and I'm like freeing these flowers from their tacky, you know, living situation, and then the thing is like growing this crazy vine-like way, and I was like, oh my God, it's like nature, you know, reasserting itself. It just seemed hilarious to me. Also, it started looking super like 80s and almost like me as a teenager trying to, you know, my semi-goth thing, and I don't know, it was just cracking me up. And so it eventually turned into an installation where I just really liked this kind of strange nature thing. I did this several years ago, and it's got all kinds of you know, it has food, it has furniture, it has clothing, all these different things. But what's sort of special about it, I think, or what I was trying to do with it, is kind of bring the art back into the crafts. And I would look at people like, you know, Martha Stewart or something, and they obviously study art and keep abreast of what's going on in contemporary art and even historically, and they'll create these ideas, but they don't tell you sort of who did this amazing thing with felt or whatever that gave them the idea in the first place. And I wanted to bring that back. So we happen to be open to this page, which is something made out of old cassette tapes. And so I mentioned Christian Markley, who's a really awesome artist who, you know, I don't know, he like crocheted all these pillows out of like the complete work of the Beatles, stuff like that. Really cool stuff that mixes sound and visual art in funny ways. He did a lot of stuff with cassette tapes, or like, you know, have things with homemade felt, because that's a super, you know, that's kind of an obligatory DIY project. But I want to talk about, you know, Joseph Boys, or people who did amazing work with felt. And actually one of my favorite projects in here is my conceptual art regifting project, which is basically just that It's just regifting, really. But it's regifting with a little label saying this is a work of conceptual art. So it makes it cool instead of lame, you know, and you can just, and actually part of the key to it is that you give someone something totally useless, like not try to find something you think they might like that you don't want, but like give like a kid's sweater to your, you know, uncle or whatever. So yeah, it's just that. I think it's a little bit funny. But it's all project-based, but you don't have to really do the project. It's meant to be read as well, and there's a lot of, so when I mention the artist, this is something I should have said earlier, when I mention artists, I kind of name drop them in the description, and then I have these pop-out boxes about the art movement or the specific artist that's mentioned, so you can kind of get a little info about who they are. And that's my book, and it's called The Starving Artist's Way. This whole process of doing this filming thing, it's like, this is my little appendage, and I almost like, oh, it's like performance art where I have this thing attached to me and I can't speak, I can't be heard unless like I drag this little guy or my little dog around with me. It's my microphone dog that enables my words to be understood by other people, otherwise I'm mute. Okay, that's all I want to say about that. You like that?
A lot. That's hilarious.
Everything's art, man.
Prepare some of the food items out of Nava's book, The Starving Artist's Way. The book gives a recipe for fortune cookies, but it also says that you can take pre-made fortune cookies, steam them open, and don't show the label. You just show it like this.
I had the best time of my whole life.